Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are talking about effective note-taking today. My name is Paul Novak. I'm the founder and CEO here at Iris Reading. I think you'll find today to be very, very helpful because, when you're a student, of course, it's not just about reading, it's also about taking notes. And, how you take notes does matter. There are some efficient ways to do it. There are some less efficient ways to do it. There are some mistakes you want to avoid. We'll be covering all of that today. I want you to be aware where you can find some handouts. For today's session, if you go to irisreading.com/classics, that's where you can find some of the handouts we're going to be going over today. And I'll have them displayed on my screen as well, but just so you're aware with regard to the handouts, and I'm going to type that link into the chat box. It's going to be https://irisreading.com/classics. I'll paste that into the chat. What you're going to do is, this is just for your reference. You don't have to download this. I would encourage you to download it, but you just go here, click to download it. Actually, it's taking me in because I'm logged into Dropbox. So let me log out. I'll just go incognito, and you can see what it'll probably look like on your end. It just forwards you to a Dropbox link. That's the PDF you need for today. And of course, you can click there, and then you just click up at I believe it's going to be at the top. There we go. And you just hit download. And that download will appear like so on your screen, depending on whether you have a Mac or a PC. Anywho, let's get into what we're covering today. We're going to talk about notes and memory. By the way, we're also going to do a little bit of a recap because this is part of a series of webinars that we've done on not just note-taking, but also speed reading, improving your comprehension, improving your memory, how to memorize information. So I'll do a recap at the end, but you could always refer back to any of those courses. You should be able to have access to those through our website if you go irisreading.com. If for whatever reason you don't have access and you want to reach out to me to get access, feel free to shoot me an email. My email, I'm going to put that in the chat as well. It's just paul@irisreading.com. So if for some reason you didn't get those previous sessions, you can shoot me an email and I could send you a link where you can access them. So let's go ahead and begin what we're going to cover. Note-taking methods. I want you to know there's no one note-taking method that is best for everyone. Just like we all have different tastes in music and food and various other things, well, guess what? There's the same thing goes with note-taking. There's going to be some methods I show you today that you might be like, wow, that is really cool. And other methods you might be like, meh. Other methods you may have heard of. But we'll talk about when these are useful and then how you can actually best utilize them. And my hope is that you find one, two, or maybe a few techniques that really, really work for you, that resonate with you, that you feel like are going to kind of change the game when it comes to studying. So we'll talk about that. There's a variety of methods. There's something called the read and recall exercise. This helps you to concentrate better. There are some digital tools we're going to be covering, some apps, programs that can make you a little more efficient as a note taker. And also, when do we go about reviewing our notes? So first quote of the day here is, what gets measured gets managed. I believe this is a quote from Peter Drucker. He's one of these godfathers of MBA programs out there. And it's just the idea that if you measure something, you start paying more attention to it and you start trying to get better at it. So anyone in track and field knows this because they're looking at time. Anyone that's into like weightlifting, they're measuring and managing and seeing how much weight they can, they can push or pull. So we're interested in measuring your speed. So let's take some sample reading material. And again, it's in that link, irisreading.com/classics. I will have the article on the screen here, but if you are looking for the PDF of it, that's where you can find it. Here's the article. It's Through the Looking Glass. Not really an article. It's a passage from, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland story you may have heard of. And if you haven't read this, that's fine. We're going to read for a minute. Now, I want you to read the way you normally would. To make sure that you can see this text, if you happen to be reading from my shared screen, I'm going to disable my webcam temporarily. Goodbye. I'll turn it back on when you're done reading. But we're only going to read for a minute, and I only want you to read at whatever speed feels comfortable. Don't try to go faster than usual. Don't try to go slower than usual. Read at your normal pace. We're going to do it for a minute, and then I'll stop you. Okay? Let me put a minute on the clock here. That's the sound you'll hear at the end of the minute. Everyone should be ready to read. You see on my screen the text. Go ahead and begin reading for 1 minute. All right, that's a minute. Look at the line where you stopped. Let's figure out our speed. Now, those numbers on the side, those will help you figure out your speed. So it just tells you how many numbers, well, how many words are up to the end of the lines. Maybe you stopped here, maybe you stopped there. Go ahead and take note of it. Remember, what gets measured gets managed. So we want to know how fast did we read. If you want, go ahead and type that in the chat. I'm curious to know. Just so you know, the chat, I keep referring to it as a chat. It is actually more of a Q&A section, question and answer section. Whatever you send there is not seen by everybody else in the group. It just goes directly to me, that questions area. It's over on your right-hand side if you're joining us on a desktop or laptop. But if you're on a mobile device, it might appear a little differently. So go ahead and type in the chat. I see a number of you are typing your speed. In case you're wondering, because some of you are average, some of you are above average, wherever you fell, the average is 150 to 250. So 150 to 250 is the average reading speed on material like this. All right, now we'll talk about speeding up and also note taking. But first, I want to ask you, can you read 20% faster? So I think a lot of you can. And here's the thing, sometimes by forcing yourself to go just a little bit faster, you can sometimes find that you improve your focus magically because you're going a little faster. It's kind of like driving. And I realize maybe not everyone has their driver's license, but when you're in a car and you're driving up and you're speeding up to merge onto the highway, start going a little bit faster than usual, all of a sudden you start paying more attention. Now, it's also possible to go too fast with your reading speed and also your driving speed. But if I asked you to go 20% faster, I want you to try this out to see if we can squeeze some better focus out of your brain. So we're going to read again. And here we have another passage from A Christmas Carol. So let's go with that. This classic by Charles Dickens. We're going to read for a minute. Again, I'm going to disable my webcam, so goodbye again. Turn it back on when you're done with the minute. And all you got to do is just read a little bit faster than your usual speed. Okay, how fast? About 20% faster. But we're not robots, so I don't expect you to go exactly 20% faster. Just try to go pace yourself a little bit faster than usual. Okay, let's try it out. Go ahead and begin reading a little faster. Alrighty, look at the line where you stopped and let's figure out that reading speed. Of course, you can share it with me in the chat area if you want. Let's take note of it. And I would imagine everyone read a little bit faster just because I specifically asked you to go a little faster. And the idea was, can we still have comprehension at those faster rates? Sometimes people find they read a little faster. And not only that, they also understood the material. So, I mean, if you finish the entire article, then you were definitely going faster than average. So great. I didn't expect everyone to finish the article. That was only a minute of reading, by the way. And maybe you got to the 200s or 300s or 400s. Some people that are above average readers will get 500 words a minute or higher. But the idea behind this approach right now that we were just talking about was if you can go a little bit faster, sometimes that actually improves comprehension because when you go faster, it forces you to focus more. So people forget that sometimes it is possible to read a little bit too slowly. If you read very, very slow, your brain will get bored. Okay. Now, we want to balance it out. We don't want to go too fast or too slow, but we can train ourselves to go faster. And how do you train yourself to get better at anything? You got to push yourself out of the comfort zone, right? Now, I don't know about you. I grew up, if I, not, I know not everyone is into sports. I grew up playing basketball. For you, maybe it's a different sport. Maybe it's not a sport. Maybe it's an instrument. Maybe it's not an instrument. Maybe it's some other skill. I also tried out like um, martial arts as a kid. I was doing taekwondo as a kid, I remember. But regardless of what kind of skill, we all know when you are learning something, let's say you have a coach, what are they going to do? They're going to try to push you out of your comfort zone. Or sometimes we got to do it ourselves. I'll give you a personal example. When I was in high school, I was extremely scared to do any kind of speaking in front of class. I hated it. And now I do like 4 or 5 presentations every single week, sometimes more. And if you asked me that is what I was going to be doing back in high school, I would laugh at you because I would think like, there's no way I would do this. I'm terrified of public speaking. Now, I still get a little anxiety from it, but the way I got better at it was really just doing a lot of it, practice, right? And to practice that, I had to get out of my comfort zone. Now, some people, sure, they're naturals at this and that. I'm sure there are some people that are just naturally gifted speakers. A very, very small minority of people are naturally gifted in certain areas, certain skills. But we all know for most things, it takes practice. It helps if you have some natural ability, great. But we need to find ways to push ourselves out of the comfort zone. That's what I'm trying to accomplish here when I say, let's go 20% faster. Now, what about reading and remembering? If you want to read and remember with notes, here's how we go about doing it. We inspect the material, but the inspection, the idea of inspecting is that I want to get the gist of the information first. Before I dive into the details, I want to, if I was inspecting a chapter, I'd be looking at the introduction, the conclusion, the headings and subheadings, boldface words. Now, what if you're inspecting an entire book? Well, that might be a different approach. We're going to get into that, but this idea of inspecting is just getting the structure of the material, the most important points. And that reminds me of this 80-20 principle because it's about how can I spend 20% of my effort and get 80% of the results. Think about that from the reading perspective. How can I read a little bit of information and get most of the information? Now, this is not meant to be a shortcut. I don't want you to think that you shouldn't be reading things from beginning to end. But you don't have to start from beginning to end. So this idea of inspecting, let's say you got a brand new book, like this self-improvement book, very popular book, by the way. I would recommend it to everyone here. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Kind of a silly title. I remember when I first read this in high school, I was like, how to win friends? I have friends. What do you mean, how to win friends? It seemed like a weird title. Despite the weird title, this book has a lot of interesting and useful points. It first got recommended to me during one of my first jobs in high school by an older adult that was very successful in his field, and he recommended that I read this. Anywho, let's say we want to get the gist of it very quickly. If you go through a book like this and you just kind of flip through quickly, one of the things you'll notice is the beginning and ends of each chapter have a quick 1-sentence summary. So every chapter has that. So if I were you, I would start by reading all the summaries. It's only a sentence at the end of every chapter. That's a quick way to take that 200-some page book and to distill the most useful information. By the way, if you're looking for the next handout, it's located here. Let me put that link in the chat. It's just files.irisreading.com/carnegie.pdf. I'm going to put that in the chat area for everyone to see. And that way, if you want to download this directly, that's where you can find it. I just added it to the chat, but you could also just write it out, and I'll have it on the screen here. It's just carnegie.pdf, the name of the file. Here it is, right here. So we're going to read this for a minute and a half. You'll read it very quickly. And here's the last page of chapter 1. You see that? Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Here's the last page of chapter 2. As you can see, it says, give honest and sincere appreciation. Well, guess what? There's a bunch of chapters in this book. Here are all the chapters. It's broken down into part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. I want you to read all the text you see on your screen. And while you're reading, I will disappear from the webcam again. Goodbye. And I just want you to read through it. I think a lot of you are going to be done in about a minute or so. I'll give you a minute and a half. So a minute and 30 seconds maximum to read all this text. Okay? And you'll see how we can take a 200 some page book and get the most important bits out of it. All right, let's try it out. Just let me put a minute 30 on the clock. Then we're going to jump back into note taking. All right, go ahead and begin reading all the chapter summaries you see on your screen. Go ahead and begin. All right, let me stop you there. That was a minute and 30 seconds, and you probably got through all of this text or most of it. And again, I'm just trying to emphasize this 80-20 idea that you can spend a little bit of time getting a lot of information if you do it strategically, like reading the summary of each chapter. Now, with regard to note taking, because you might dive into this book, you might start reading it chapter by chapter, and you might want to take notes. If you want to remember it well, it's a good idea because note taking does improve your recall ability. So what we do while you're reading a chapter, first, you got to inspect. That just means get familiar with your chapter first. So if I'm on chapter number 1, all I'm doing is reading the introduction. Now I'm looking at my headings, my subheadings, boldface words, just flipping page by page. When I get to the end, the summary, I'm just going to read the final page of that chapter, the summary. And then I'm going to go back to the beginning. And I'm going to read that chapter beginning to end. But before I read, if I inspected the material, I got to take some notes. I just looked at all the headings and subheadings. I'm going to take like my first impression notes on what this is all about. Now, as far as how we go about taking notes, we're going to get into a few different methods right now, but then we read, and while we're reading, we take more notes. After we're done reading, you do something called what we would call an inquiry step. That just means ask questions. What did I just read? That's the most basic question, but more specifically, you might want to ask, what are the most important points? Or if I was a student, I'd be asking, what do I need to memorize? Next, that leads us to the storage step. What do I have to memorize? How am I going to store it? But storing is where you could also review and reorganize your notes. So let's talk about some note-taking strategies. First of all, if you've ever seen like a used textbook, or maybe you've been guilty of this, excessive highlighting. How does this happen? Well, I'll tell you. Someone's reading, or maybe it's you, and you're reading something and you're like, this is, I got to know this inside out because I got a test coming up. You read something very important and you're like, I'm going to highlight that, or maybe you underline it. Now I read the next sentence. Turns out that one's pretty important too. So I'm going to highlight that as well. And now I read my third sentence, and it turns out this one is way more important than the previous two. So I might use a different color now, or you see where this is going. If you're doing this, you're going to end up with a whole paragraph or a whole page that is highlighted. And you don't want that, because if you highlight too much, that kind of defeats the purpose of highlighting, right? So when do we do it? Finish a paragraph first, then highlight or underline or take notes. Or what I like to do, I don't take any notes until I finish an entire section of text. Now, how often should you take notes? Well, that depends. If your main purpose is to just read through the chapter, you don't want to spend more than 20% of your time note taking. 80% or more should be spent reading and pushing through and knocking out that reading exercise. If you're spending more than 20% of your time on notes, that's probably too much. I've dealt with students that read for an hour and they spend 30 minutes taking notes. Not all at one time, but they read a little, take some notes, read a little, take some notes, read a little, take some notes. And they wonder why they've spent an hour studying and they barely got any reading done, maybe just a few pages of text. So that's usually because they're spending too much time on the notes. Now, with regard to highlighting and underlining, I don't want to totally dissuade you from it if that's your thing. But be aware that you don't want to do it excessively. You want to be concise. Even if you're not highlighting or underlining, even if you're taking notes by hand, or if you're typing out your notes, being concise means coming up with abbreviations. That might be, think about the word government. We could spell it all out, government, or we could just do GOV. Or another long word like university. I would just put UNI. Written versus digital notes. There is some evidence to suggest that writing notes is a little more effective for your memory than digital notes. However, we all know there's pros and cons to each. Digital notes, you can store them on multiple devices in the cloud. You could also search digital notes. It's kind of hard to search by computer through paper-based notes, right? Or you could do a hybrid. I might take notes by hand and then I will decide to, maybe I take all these notes by hand and now I'm going to take a photo of that and store it in whatever note-taking program I choose. Outlines. This is another thing that we all know how to do, but I want you to know outlines are better when you have sequential information, like history, or something that's like step by step. But they're not conducive to other topics that are more non-linear. There's a lot of topics. Most topics are non-linear. Sure, history is very linear. But what about the topic of law, medicine, business? We can go on. Physics. A little more nonlinear. So this is where we want to think about how we can take notes in a different way. A good way to consider taking notes is something called split page note taking. It's something like I have on this page. This is just a screenshot of this page right here. And you see here, American history, 3 branches of government. This is just a basic example where you would divide your page in half. And on the left side, you got your big concept, or it could be a question. Then you have your details over here. If you were taking notes while you're in class, this might be like, okay, in one word or just a short phrase, what is the teacher talking about right now? Generally. Okay, now while they're talking, I'm going to jot down some little notes. Oh, okay, this factoid, this detail, this detail, this detail. Oh, we're switching topics now? Add my topic over here. Okay, let me add my details as I'm going along. I'm just adding keywords here. Another topic, more details. So topics on the side here, details on the right here. That's how we can go about doing this. And we can also do this in a spreadsheet. So let me show you what I mean here, because I got a spreadsheet open right over here. And what you can do is you can do the same thing. In column A, we have our topics. Here we have our details. And you could kind of use this like a way to quiz yourself. So for example, kind of like flashcards. I right click on this column. And I'm just going to say hide. Okay. And then if I was studying, preparing for a test, I'd be like, okay, legislative branch. What do I remember about that? What details do I remember? Oh yeah, there's a House and a Senate, and the House is based on population. The Senate is, you get 2 per state. The term, I got to remember the terms. Oh yeah, 2-year term in Congress for the House, and then there's a 6-year term for the Senate. Let me see if I got that right. So I go back over here. Remember, I hid that column. See column A, and then column C. There's a column B in between. To make it show up again, I just click here. Did I get that right? Okay, looks like I got that right. Let me go, I'm gonna hide that column again. And now I'm gonna quiz myself on the executive branch. And now I check, did I get that correct? Okay, let me hide it again. Same exact idea. So this is a way to kind of like, it's almost like flashcards. And there's a lot of flashcard programs out there that you can check out. Like Quizlet is one. I will shoot a message in the chat regarding Quizlet because I don't have a slide for it. But if you go to Quizlet.com, I know a lot of you are probably already familiar with that tool because it's a very popular one, but there's a bunch of them. And this is just a way we can kind of take notes. You can do it by hand too. How do we do it? We just fold the page. We cut it in half previously. And I could just be like, okay, what do I remember about this? Did I get it right? Turn it over. What do I remember about executive branch? Did I get it right? So this is just another way of taking notes. There's another method of taking notes. If you want to take notes in a rapid manner while reading through things rapidly, a great way to do that is with the Morse code method. So this is a rapid note-taking method. It's meant to be very, very quick on the notes. So what you can see here, look in the right-hand margin. You're using dots and dashes. Here's a dot, here's a dash. What do they mean? Dot is the main point. Dash is the supporting detail. Now, notice what's going on here. You're not getting bogged down with writing. You're just like trying to get through a chapter quickly. And because you don't want to spend too much time being heavy with the notes, you can refer back later. When you're done with your chapter, I can go back and say, all right, let me look at all my dots and dashes. And now I'm going to paraphrase them. And I'm going to write down more detailed notes. But these dots and dashes are just meant to be, okay, main idea, some very important supporting detail, and I just continue reading as I'm going. So at the end of a chapter, you might have dots and dashes on, a page here, a page there, every other page, and so on. When you're done with the chapter, you go back and you kind of go back to pick up all those dots and dashes and turn them into notes. Maybe you turn them into a mind map. Maybe you turn them into notes that look a little something like this, like we were just talking about previously. And then you want to make sure you're paraphrasing. So I wouldn't copy this entire sentence down. I would try to look at that sentence and say, how can I paraphrase that? Or how can I make that a little more concise? If I put it into my own words, that's actually some mental effort that helps you remember it much, much better. It's kind of like you want to think of it as if I was teaching this to you or a sibling or a friend or a classmate or my parents, how would I talk about this? And when you try to teach something to someone, there's a common phrase. They say, teach once, learn twice. Because, I mean, you can't teach something unless you know it. But when you are teaching something, you're actively thinking about what you're trying to explain. And if you could get someone else to explain it in your own words, that helps you remember it even better. So I'd highly encourage you to, not just with taking notes, also reciting and talking about your notes and teaching them to other people, whether it's a brother, sister, it could be your parents, it could be classmates. Very, very helpful. So this Morse code method is just about dots and dashes. And all you're doing is dots for the main ideas, dashes for the supporting details. Now, there's also this method of sketch notes. This relies on the visual system of our brain. And we remember visual information much more easily. So if you could combine some visuals in your note taking, that can be helpful. It's just another method. You don't have to be artistically inclined to do this. It could be just a matter of just some doodles here. These are not anything, I mean, I can't draw at all, but I can do some of this stuff right here. This is basic stuff. Or here, I mean, there's a bunch of ways you can just doodle to take notes. Another visual way to take notes is through mind mapping. Mind maps are a great way to organize information visually and in a nonlinear way. So here you see a mind map on how to create a mind map. It's very meta. But the idea is you have a central idea, you have some supporting details. There is a reason why they call them mind maps. I want to show you a cool program for mind mapping that I enjoy using. I'll put it in the chat. It's just called Xmind. And they have a free download. If you go to xmind.net, that's where you can find it. Just go to the website, you click download. Of course, like a lot of programs, they have a premium version and a free version. I've been using the free version for years. You could download it for a Mac or a PC. It also works in the cloud, but it looks a little something like this. So you see here, you have a bunch of templates you can use. Let's say I use this one, and I want to create my little mind map here. And let me see if I start off blank and I just wanted to copy what we had before, where we have the 3 branches of government. Then I could say, okay, well, we got the legislative branch. We got the executive branch. We got the judicial branch. And then what do I remember about these? Or I can add my notes. Okay, well, this branch makes laws. And then this branch is broken up, you have Congress, and then the Congress has the House and the Senate, and then we could add our details to the House, like, this has 2-year terms. This has 6-year terms. This is based on population, the number of representatives, And this one is based on, well, there's 2 per state. And then we could go to the executive area, and we say, okay, well, the executive area has obviously the president, the VP, and then there's the cabinet. That's what I got to remember. Judicial side, we have, they're the ones that are interpreting the laws. So I would say, okay, interprets laws, their function. And then I might say, okay, well, it's broken up into the Supreme Courts, and then there's the circuit courts, and then there are the district courts. So I'm going to add that there. Now, if I wanted to quiz myself later, I could just go, you see this little minus sign here? Here, I'm going to zoom in on it. See that minus sign? If I click on that, it will minimize all of the data there. If I click on it, it hides it. So we go like this. When it's time to review, I'm just going to be like, okay, 3 branches of government. What do I remember from the legislative side? Oh yeah, there's Congress, House, and Senate, and I recall my information, then I check to see if I'm right. To check it, I just click on this to see, and it expands. And I can see, okay, that's what they do. Did I get that right? Good. What about the executive? Okay, do I know that? Good. What about the judicial side? Do I know this one? Good. And this is a good way to kind of visually organize your information. As you can see, it's very, very easy to use. Mind maps are a great way to organize information. I use them for brainstorming. Actually, I'll show you right now, brainstorming. If I'm doing, or if you're doing a presentation, or you're doing some writing, which every student's got to do writing at some point, right? If you read something, sometimes you got to write about it. Whether it's a presentation, a paper, what we do is we have the topic in the middle, and you start with a brainstorm. That just means, okay, what do I want to write about? Well, I don't know the order yet. I know I want to talk about this, and this, and this, and I got to cover this. Oh, and there's this note from page 14. I got to cover that as well. I want to add this. Oh, I remember this little detail I got to include. I don't know where. So I just start double clicking and adding my notes. And then that's when we could say, okay, well, what about the introduction? My first paragraph. What from all these things needs to be in there? Oh, I'm going to include this. And I'm going to include this and this. Oh, this is a separate topic. I'm going to include this over here, this over there. Oh, this is related to this. Wait a minute, I got a duplicate here, so I'm going to delete that. And then we just start adding our information as we go along. So we go from what appears to be just a mess, and that's what a brainstorm is. Sometimes they call it a brain dump because you're dumping all the information out of your head onto the page, or here, the digital page or the screen. And then we can reorganize from there. But if you try to start from the beginning, like what is the first thing, it's very, very hard if you go in a linear fashion because the brain does not work in a linear way. Your brain is much more non-linear. That's why mind mapping is so effective. So check out that XMind program. There's a bunch of other mind mapping programs you can check out. You can just Google free mind mapping programs. I'm sure you'll find a bunch. I like using XMind because it's very, very simplistic and easy to use. And there are also a lot of other features that, I mean, you see this little panel on the side here. We could actually add, some formatting if we wanted to. There's also things like you might be adding, let's say, different icons here, different things like that. You could even link to web pages. You might want to add your own images. There's a lot that you can do with mind maps. So something for you to look into. Another concept that you might find helpful with regard to note-taking is something called monetary notes. Now, this is somewhat of a unique note-taking method. The idea of monetary notes is to assign value to your notes. Not all notes are created equal. Some notes, very important. Some notes I think are important now, and they find out later they're not that important. Some notes are kind of medium importance. Now, if something is not important, I wouldn't even bother taking notes. But you can think of note-taking or your notes in 3 levels, like 20s, 50s, and 100s. Hundreds being the most valuable, 50s being of medium value, and 20s being, it's still a 20, it's important. Now, we're not going to deal with 10s, 5s, 1s, quarters, nickels, dimes. We're just going to go with the 50s, the 20s, and the 100s. So what we do here is while we're reading, the moment you come across something that is like, okay, that's important, you want to ask yourself, how important? Very important? Okay, we're going to assign the values because you could do this with spreadsheet organization. You have your chapter in one column, you have the page number in another, and then you have your rating, and then you have the notes. This is an example of a most important note. That's 100. A 50, that's just it's important as well, but not 100 important. It's 50 important. And then there's 20s. Now, if you did this for a long period of time, here's what it's going to end up looking like. You're going to have a bunch of notes. You're going to be spending a whole semester taking notes, and you're going to be getting through maybe hundreds of pages. You're going to have all this content here, and I might have it organized in a linear fashion, as you can see here. But then with every note, on page 2, there's a $50 bill. What is the note? Here's my note, right over here. Okay. What about on page 4? If I found something on page 4 that's important, but maybe not as important as the first one, I'm still going to take that note, but I'm giving that a 20. And then I find 100, and so on and so forth. Why would we do this? When it is time to review your notes at the end of the semester or before a big test or quiz that's coming up, I'm just going to go like this. I'm going to click here. I'm going to say, sort my sheet from Z to A. That means from biggest to smallest in terms of numbers. So when I click this, see all the hundreds are at the top now. If I got a review, I don't have all day to review, right? Sometimes when final exams are coming up, you got to test in this class and that class. Plus, you might be busy with sports or other extracurriculars. We got limited amount of time. All of us get 24 hours. Nobody gets any more or less in terms of on the day. So someone asked, what language is that? This is just Latin text. This is sometimes people consider it like filler text. Common thing to see is like lorem ipsum. By the way, developers will sometimes use this when they're just trying to add text to a website. You see this lorem ipsum generator. So you just look up lorem ipsum. It says in publishing and graphic design, lorem ipsum is a placeholder text commonly used to demonstrate visual form of a document in typeface without relying on meaningful content. Lorem ipsum may be used as a placeholder. And so we see right here in case if you were looking for what this is related to, as you can see, Latin. Now, so we go through this, and the reason why you want to do that is you end up with all your hundreds. We got to prioritize that because those are the most important things we read during the semester. I'm going to read all this. Now, sometimes you're going to read this text and you're going to be like, hold on. This right here, page 5, the note I took here doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I'm assuming this would be in English, a language I'm familiar with. And this text right here, what in the world is going on here? Let me go back to page 11. And if I didn't know what this was about, I would go back here and say, okay, let me go back to page 11. Let me read that again. Oh, okay, now I see what's going on here. See how that works? Nice and easy. We just go and read all of our hundreds, then we read all of our 50s, and we prioritize our review of notes. So this is just a more strategic way to be a student, I think, because otherwise, when it's time, you ever have a teacher that did this to you? I know I have. You ask them, so what's the test going to cover? What's the final exam going to cover? And the teacher says everything. And you're like, it would be nice if you gave me some direction here on how to study. But when they say everything is important, well, I need a way to study for it. So if I had everything organized in a spreadsheet, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my spreadsheet. I'm going to refer back to all those notes. I'm going to prioritize them based on 100. And now it's going to be much easier for me to study and review rather than just, rereading as much as I can. Another program I want to recommend, and I've recommended it before in other webinars, but I want to reiterate it. Evernote is an awesome tool. I've put it in the chat, but if you go to evernote.com, this is just another note-taking tool. There are a bunch of note-taking tools out there, but this is one of the better ones, I think, because it works on multiple devices, iPhone, Android, in the cloud. They give you a lot of free storage. It has a lot of capabilities, so I highly recommend checking that out. There's actually, let me show you real quick on my end, if I was using it in regards to, one second, if I was using this program and I was studying for like a history class. So Evernote is organized into notebooks. You have your notebooks here. Here are maybe my notes in maybe you have lecture notes for each date, or maybe you have lecture notes, maybe not lecture notes, but notes for each chapter. And then of course you might even organize your homework in here to keep track. You could also even keep track of audio. So let's say you want to record a lecture from your teacher. Of course you want to ask them permission. You can record the session. When you're done recording the session, you hit stop and you have your audio note right over there. And there's a lot of other things you can do with this. You see it syncing right now to the cloud, and that way, if I'm no longer in front of my laptop, I could always retrieve my notes on my phone, right? They're always stored on multiple devices. So it's just another useful note-taking tool that I love recommending, and you should check that out. If I was a student, I would have a notebook for every single one of my classes, and every single lecture would have its own note in its own notebook. And of course, every time I read a chapter, I would have a note for that chapter. It's all part of the storage step here. Now, there's another thing I want to cover, and that is this read and recall exercise. This is a simple way to improve your concentration while you're reading. So I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. It's not that hypothetical because I think it happens to everyone. You ever read a whole page and you read a whole page of text and you're like, I have no clue what I just read. We've all had that happen to us. Sometimes our mind wanders off. Sometimes things get a little boring. Now, it's easier to pay attention if something's interesting, but as a student, it is inevitable that sometimes you will come across material that is not that interesting, but you got to read it anyway for school. So how do we keep our attention there? How do we keep our focus? Because our mind's very dynamic. If it gets bored, it tries to think about other things that are more interesting. But if we're studying, we need to keep that attention. What do we do? This read and recall exercise can help. What you do is very simple. Every time you finish a piece of text, like a section, you force yourself to recall that information by taking notes. Finish this section, take some notes. Maybe you're creating a mind map, maybe you're creating notes on just a blank sheet of paper, maybe you're jotting something down on the page or underlining. Force yourself to take notes, and here's why. When you continue reading, at some point your brain will wander off. Let's say you keep reading, and when you finish this section, you take some more notes. You read up to here, take some more notes. You read up to here, you take some more notes. Now, eventually, let's say somewhere over here, you start reading, and this is just getting really dry. And now your brain is wandering off, but you think you're still reading. Your brain sometimes will still go word by word, but you're not even paying attention. Finally, you get up to like right here, and you're like, whoa, 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 let me stop here. I'm not getting any of this. How far back do I need to go? Well, I took notes over here, so I'll just go back to here. The problem is a lot of students, what'll happen is their brain starts wandering off. The moment that happens, you got to think, okay, I got to go back, obviously. How far back do I need to go? It's not very clear, right? If you were taking notes after each section, forcing yourself to do that, getting into the habit of doing that, well, now it's very clear. If my brain wandered off here, I just go back up to here. I don't have to go back 2 or 3 or 10 pages. That eats up precious time. So this read and recall exercise, you can do it very easily. You can read something and just force yourself into taking some notes. Let's try it out right now. I've got a selection from the introduction of this book right here, A Really Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. This is an awesome book. I'd highly recommend it if you're not too bogged down with your current reading. And let's go ahead and just take a moment. Let me give you 2 minutes. Actually, you know what? I'll give you a minute and a half because there's not that much text on the screen here. Some of you might finish all this text in a minute and a half. Let me disable my webcam. I'm going to give you a minute and 30 seconds. Read as much as you can, but here's what you got to do. You have to jot down a note after every paragraph. So when you finish this, force yourself to write something down. You can copy a word from there. You could write down something it made you think of. By the way, actually, for this first one, you don't have to write something down because it's only 2.5 lines or so. Take a note when you finish here, and then after each paragraph, write something down, whether it's the word atoms or the word puzzle or something else. You don't have to copy a word. It could also just be something that came to mind. But I want you to force yourself to write something down after every single paragraph, except the first one because it's really short. Let's try it out. I'll give you a minute and 30 seconds. Go ahead and begin. All right, that was a minute of reading. Actually, I'm sorry, a minute and a half. And the idea here is we've been talking about this read and recall method or exercise. The idea is if we're going to read through material and you want to keep your attention there, you want to make sure that you're forcing yourself to take notes. I'm not saying you got to take notes after every paragraph all the time for the rest of your life. Just that you do it when you're having trouble concentrating. Now, there's another thing you can do, which is to read and visualize. So what I want you to try now is force yourself to visualize information while you're reading it, okay? You don't have to take the notes right now. In this next exercise, every time you finish a paragraph or while you're reading the paragraph, you got to force yourself to visualize. That means, and here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to read this passage from The Wizard of Oz, which many of us seen maybe as a movie, but I want you to read the text. And what you got to do while you're reading is think about what would that look like, or what do you remember from the movie? If this was not a movie you already had seen, you would be thinking to yourself, what does this look like if it was a movie? Now, if you're reading nonfiction, you're just thinking, what would this look like if I was turning this into a documentary? What if you were a videographer, you read some information, maybe it's a history book, and you got to turn that history book into a documentary on that particular topic? What does that scene look like when you're reading that paragraph in your head? How would you visualize it? This is important and a great reading technique if you want to remember things better, if you can visualize information as you're reading. Let's try it out. I'll minimize my webcam, or actually disable my webcam while you're reading so you can read from this text. And by the way, this is from that same link I showed you earlier, irisreading.com/classics. It's on one of the pages here, but you can read from my shared screen. We're just going to read for just a minute and see how far you get while you're visualizing. You don't have to take notes right now. Just read and visualize in your head. What would that look like? Let's try it out. I'll give you a minute. Go ahead and begin reading. All right, let me stop you there. That was a minute of reading. Feel free to take note of your reading speed. You can actually add it into the chat if you want to share it with me. And I'm just curious, this is a technique that you can use to kind of help you get a little bit better comprehension while you're reading, to read and visualize something. Now, there's another thing I want to go over, and that is some of the most important concepts from previous courses that we've covered. And you can refer back to those other courses. We have one on speed reading, we have one on memory, other topics like productivity. But the most important topics I would summarize in a very short period of time of less than 5 minutes would be this. One, if you're reading and it happens to be on the page, use your hand or your finger or pen as a guide because your eyes are attracted to motion. It'll help you focus better, and that'll help you read faster and with better comprehension. Now, if you're reading on the page, you can also change up your reading speed. You shouldn't always be going at the same rate. You could do this on the screen too. Slow down, speed up. Slow down, speed up. When do you slow down? Here's a good rule of thumb. Slow down on the first sentence and then speed up after that first sentence. New paragraph, same thing. Slow down on the first sentence and then speed up a little bit. A little bit, not too fast. Why would we slow down on the first sentence of a paragraph? It's because, obviously, the first sentence is usually the main idea, right? Or the topic sentence, however you want to call it. You get that idea and then you try to run with it. That's a good way to improve comprehension because it kind of gets you into this reading rhythm. And that can help you focus more because when you change speed, you force your mind to pay more attention. Now, if you're reading on the screen and you can't use your hand as a guide, you can use this Accelerator program. If you go to accelerator.com, that is the free speed reading tool that we developed. And what it does, it blinks the words on the screen and it goes at whatever speed you set in the program. It's a great training tool and it's a good tool to pace yourself if you're reading a lot on the screen. All you got to do is copy and paste your text. Another key takeaway from all this is before you read anything, you should always inspect what you read. What I mean by that is get familiar with something before you read it. Headings, subheadings. Maybe you read your introduction, conclusion. If your text is just a blank article with just paragraphs, what if you read the first sentence of each paragraph before reading the entire article? That gives you an edge. It gives you a heads up as to, hey, here's what this is going to be about, and now I'm going to read it. And now you're going to read it faster. Why? Because you know what to expect, and you'll have better comprehension because you already have a map in your head of what this is going to be about. Once you're done reading something, inquire, ask questions. What did I just read? Or what are the most important takeaways? Or what do I got to memorize? And that leads us to the final step. How am I going to store this information? If you haven't already noticed, this is an acronym for IRIS. This is what we would call the IRIS method. And the whole point is to read something comprehensively. You want to go through all these steps. The final step of storing, that's when you actually try to memorize information. Most important takeaway from that is visual information is more memorable. That's why we remember faces, but we forget names. Do you remember my name? You might have forgotten it. That's fine. My name's Paul, by the way. But why do we forget a name, but you remember the face is much easier to remember, right? Because it's visual information. That's just how we're wired as human beings. Visual information is easier to remember. So when we're trying to remember things, we need visual ways to do it. I was telling you to read visually earlier, but you could also use that numeric peg system that we covered in our memory course. And that's related to taking numbers and visualizing them. 1 to a pencil, 2 to a swan, and so on. And we associate that to the topics. And then we did that actually in the memory course to remember the brain rules in a precise order. There's the memory palace, which uses locations, also known as the method of loci. It was an ancient Greek method, and it's stood the test of time. It just takes locations. You make a walkthrough of your home, use that to remember things. You could also improve your vocabulary with the similar sound technique. You look for a similar sound in a word, like ballonophobia. We did this. This was the fear of needles, and we took balloon, which sounds like balloon. Balloon has nothing to do with the fear of needles. That's okay. We're going to force the balloon to get involved. And the balloon is afraid of needles coming towards it. And we just picture this in our head because visual information is easier to remember. With anthrophobia, we did the same thing. That's the fear of people. We just pictured a bunch of, we look for anthropology. You could go based on that prefix, or ant, maybe a bunch of ants afraid of people stepping on them. Kino is a German word for cinema. If we're in a movie theater and we're trying to remember, okay, Kino in German means cinema or movie theater. Kino sounds like rhino. We pictured a bunch of rhinos busting through the screen and chasing people around a movie theater. This is another way to do it. Just come up with something ridiculous, a weird image, and you'll remember things better. And I'm Polish, so I gave you a Polish word in the past with regard to the word house. And if you remember correctly, that means, well, the word for house in Polish is dom. So dom is house. Okay, dome kind of sounds like dome. We pictured a dome-shaped house. Very simple, exaggerated visual, but it helps us to remember dome is house. A house with a dome around it, or a dome-shaped house. So we have 3 techniques. We have what? Numeric peg system, using numbers to remember things visually. We have memory palace, using locations to remember things visually. And we have the similar sound technique, using sound to remember things visually. All 3 of these are very effective. Now, one other big takeaway, if you want to read faster, you got to do these speed drills. If you're not familiar with them, or if you need a reminder of what they are, what we could do is practice these speed drills. Your goal is to see words at double the normal speed. How do we do that? That means if you're reading at 200, you practice at 400. So eventually, 250 doesn't feel that fast. Eventually, if you're reading at 250, you practice at 500. Always practice at double your rate so you can start picking up your speed. Now, the way you do this, and this is unofficial homework because we got to wrap up here. 1, read your material first. 2, do a speed drill. That is just skimming over what you just read in half the time. 10 minutes a day, 2 weeks. That would be ideal as a follow-up to today's webinar. Or take one of our more comprehensive speed reading courses. So you inspect first, read, time yourself. Maybe you read for 20 minutes, ask questions, and then do a speed drill. So if you read for 20 minutes, your speed drill is 10. If you read for 12 minutes, your speed drill is 6. All you're doing is skimming over what you just read in half the time. If you read for 4 minutes, your speed drill is 2. And that's how we can start building up your rate. You could do it with Accelerator, but if you did this 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks, that would be ideal. I want to thank everyone so much for attending today's webinar. I hope you found this helpful. If you ever have any questions, you can reach out to me, paul@irisreading.com. You're also more than welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. Any questions you have related to reading, memory, note-taking, other study skills, or productivity, feel free to reach out. If you have your own tools that you find helpful and you want to share them with me, I love hearing about new apps, tools, and websites that are helpful for productivity. Thank you all so much for attending. I hope you found this helpful, and have a great rest of the day. Take care and feel free to keep in touch if you ever have any questions. Have a good one.